Well, good morning. I just checked the audio to make sure the audio is going to be okay and not clobbered like it was yesterday. Turns out I think it's kind of a glitch in the iPad software for the camera, so that if you start without the microphone, then if you plug it in later, it overcompensates and puts a buzz in the audio. So just checked it. It looks okay. Beautiful day here today. It's going to be well up into the 90s and very pleasant. Well, I woke up real early this morning thinking about the story. And I'm very happy how it's turned out. I almost get to where I think of all these people in the story as almost like my family. There's Mac. He could be like my brother. Maybe he is. I don't know. There's Sharon and Pinky and Shelley and Gracie. Mark's gone. And then he goes to plus 23 and winds up in Kyoto, Japan, where there's Mary, Mitsuko, Seuss, Shin. These characters are all just really neat people, and they appeal to me. So I was thinking about that. I'm laying in bed and thinking about the story and thinking that probably today might be the last. And if you recall, I sort of had to apologize yesterday because some of you may have thought that number 10 was going to be the last. Well, it wasn't the last, but I think today we're going to get a fur piece, as they say. In fact, I think today we're going to get 130 light years. Well, let's see how it goes. Okay, it's they're back on Prime, and the last thing we talked about is that Max sort of in jest he asked the crew if anybody there wanted to go home and not play anymore, and they started throwing food at him. I think he got hit with a couple of wheat rolls. But it wasn't a serious uprising in the crew. I think they were all just really, really anxious to get going. So tomorrow we start for the Centauri system. In our crew meeting, I asked Alex if he could think of anything else we needed to do to prepare for this initial trip extrasolar. Everybody turned to look while he composed himself. He said quietly that he was sure we had covered all our bases and was at a loss for words to describe how bad he actually wanted to get underway. Several voices, well, actually every voice, said almost simultaneously, yes. Well, I dismissed the crew and watched as some went to their staterooms and some remained in the mess to shoot the bull. Seuss and Drell were fast friends and sat in deep conversation. I thought that for a change, Drell was really animated recently. She had been in a family some years now, and was quietly competent, but now she seemed to be alive and alert. Interesting. She seemed to match Alex's enthusiasm for the upcoming trip, like she couldn't wait either. Excuse me. The trip to the Centauri system the next morning seemed to be almost anticlimactic. We lifted off at 0900 and were in orbit weightless 30 minutes later. Alex had a course set to Proxima Centauri first, and after giving the ship a little positive thrust for a couple of minutes, he shut the thrusters down and began a countdown on the PA for 5 seconds. He hit the go button, and we immediately saw a completely different starscape. Alex had asked Mac if he could give a running account to the crew and had been given that permission. He said to the crew that he had aimed for 1/2 light year from Proxima Centauri, so we would only be able to see a brighter than usual star ahead of us. He said Alpha Centauri A and Alpha Centauri B, a binary star system, were 0.8 light years farther and were both off beside us and wasn't visible from the bridge. He informed the crew that he had aimed his course to arrive in the vicinity between Proxima and the binary. He told the crew that he was entering the second leg to get us within about 150 million miles from Proxima, and then we would park in low thrust while the sensors looked for planetary bodies around the habitable zone of Proxima. He said if we didn't find anything there, we'd go around 90 degrees and take a look there. Well, he did that, and then said there was going to be a period of time at low G thrust where they could resume ship's work for a time. It had been 15 minutes since orbit at prime. The sensor and navigation people, by this time led by Sharon, were hard at work in SIC, doing the grunt work of identifying potential habitable planets in the Goldilocks zone. That zone was defined by the luminance of the star and the distance which would usually allow liquid water at some reasonable average surface temperature, like looking for a proverbial needle in a haystack, but realistically the odds seem to be in favor of a normal G-sequence star having such planets. You just never know. Well, they readily found Proxima B, which was already a known planet at Proxima. There were no other planets found at this distance, and after a reasonable effort, Mac and Alex agreed to move the ship to 90 degrees to take another look. That effort failed to find another in the life zone, so they decided to move the ship into orbit around Proxima B, the planet. They did that and were sorely disappointed. The surface temperature was an unhealthy minus 150 degrees C, and there was no evidence found of any free water. It was now 1400 hours ship time. Alex said, "Your call, Captain." Max said that they would move ship to 150 million miles from Alpha A and call it a night. They could use thrusters to maintain normal gravity for the evening and night, start again in the morning. Alex moved the ship to 150 million miles from A and closed his console down. This is all done by transfer. So you're there. Drill set ship thrust spin-wise to A and prepared to switch places with Seuss for 4 hours and then Shelley for a rotating 2-hour on, 4-hour off overnight coverage. Mac announced men's space routine. That was minimal duties while in space. Crucial systems were all monitored by computer with alarms set to ring if any defects were found. The ship had yet to find any examples. Well, the next day, Mac called for space search routine at 0900. The sensor team searched the area of Alpha Centauri A for candidate planets in the area. 3 planets seen, but 2 were gas giants, and 1 was at about 170 million miles out from the primary. A little bit too cold. Well, Mac directed moving the ship to Alpha Centauri B. 4 planets seen, 3 were gas giants, and 1 was at about 26 million miles from its primary. Way too close to investigate even with the minimal heat tolerance of the ship. The rest of the area seemed to be littered with debris from some unknown source, which seemed to extend from about 80 million miles to about 110 million. A planet destroyed? Well, Mac directed the ship be taken out a half-light year for a crew consult. Distance achieved, Mac held a crew meeting. He outlined the search failure, told the crew that they would drift tonight with men's space routine set from now until 0800, when we will investigate a star system they had been advised might be the source of some anomalous signals seen from prime space systems. Mac spent the evening on the bridge with Mitsuko and Drill. A quiet evening, and when Mary came to relieve the OOD, Mac and Mitsuko retired to his cabin. Seuss and Shelley had shifts coming up to relieve Drell, so they left the bridge to have many sleep periods. Mac wondered what the new day would see as he had breakfast with Mitsuko and Mary at the captain's table in the mess. He noticed how animated Drill seemed this morning. She was bubbly and in an obviously good mood. She seemed to thrive on space routine. Well, Mac wondered if her natural parents had been space people in another place and time. Well, Mac set space routine at 0830 and instructed the crew to be seated. Mac walked over to Alex and said that he was sort of excited to be in an unusual position of preparing to direct the ship into the unknown. He said the star system they were headed for was far enough away from Prime that there was almost nothing known about it. Only that Prime had told them there may be something unusual there. Max said to let him go get strapped on and he would be directed to move the ship. Max sat and strapped in and immediately directed Alex to move ship, Alex. The forward window showed a sparkling star, clear and bright from the distance specified by the position data given him by Prime. Mac looked to the far right and saw a bright green sparkly planet from what seemed to be less than 500,000 miles. Like right next door in the great scheme of things. Well, he wondered how Prime had got these location figures. He thought that there had to be something Prime knew that nobody else on Prime knew. "Alex," Max said, "come and look at this on our right." Alex stood up in the light gravity set for minimal movement starwise and moved to beside Mac. Both of them stood gazing at this sight for long minutes. Mac said that it looks like we may have hit the jackpot right off the bat. He spoke into the ship's PA for Shelley to ensure we got all this recorded, and for the crew to take notes and video at will. Well, the ship was quiet except for the light rumble of the 0.1G setting. "Seuss, put that planet directly in front of us. We're going to stick here for a while and see what happens." Alex asked if he was expecting something to happen. Well, Mac replied that if he missed the mark, that they would be having visitors in a few hours. Mac turned on the normal space broadcast radios and immediately heard chatter on every band he turned to. As he selected channels, he found one which sounded familiar. A voice said, "SS Prime 2, come in. SS Prime 2, come in." Well, Mac looked at Alex and Seuss and said, "Well, here goes nothing." He triggered the mic and said, SS Prime 2, SS Prime 2, who was calling?" Well, immediately the voice said, "SS Prime 2, welcome to Sarnox. Please hold your position. We are sending an escort for your ship and will direct you to land at our capital, Bandrox City, to welcome you and your crew formally. Please remain on this frequency." Excuse me. The voice continued, "If you please, what's your name, Captain?" Mac replied to this request and said, "Mac Rand. And yours?" The voice replied almost immediately, saying, "Briley, Mr. Rand. Pleased to meet you. I may meet you in person in a short time if I'm not shoved aside by the VIPs. Please stand by, Captain Mac Rand." Excuse me. Well, Mac sensed a presence beside him. It was Drell. She asked him politely if she could speak with Briley. Well, Mac thought. Mac handed the microphone to Drell, and immediately she began speaking. She said, "Briley, this is Jean Drell. Briley immediately returned, saying, "Yes, Miss John Drill, good to hear from you. We will notify your parents you have arrived." Well, Drill turned to Mac and said that she would appreciate it if he wouldn't make a great big deal out of this. She continued, saying that it would all be made clear when she had an opportunity to spend some time with him and the rest of the crew when we get on the ground. She told him that until the reception, she would also be pleased if he would let her continue her shipboard duties until we get the ship on the ground and secured. Well, Mac nodded and said that if she wanted, she could go relieve Seuss and get us safely there. Drill grinned up at him and gave him a quick, very tight hug, and then moved quickly to Seuss and said she was going to relieve her. Seuss got up, Drill sat down. She lovingly seemed to caress the ship's controls as she readied herself for action. Well, Drill activated the pilot to captain channel and said simply, "Mac, Swandar was my very short-time caretaker. She didn't know how to handle me, so she was very happy to get rid of me when I got with you and your family. My family now. In fact, I have 2 families." Mac looked over at Drill and shook his head and gave her a smile and a wink. Excuse one more minute. It's like very interesting even to me. Never having done this before, it's like the story impinges on my mind, even though it came from there. Besides it's early in the morning. Couldn't wait. Well, while we waited for our escort ship down to Sarnox, Mac took a call from Gracie in the galley. Well, she asked Mac if it was true they were 130 light years away from Prime. Well, Mac said that yes, that was the approximate distance. Gracie then said that you don't have any problems with long-distance operation of the translator unit, as I just got the food for our lunch and some advanced stuff I needed for supper tonight. It's working at least at 130 light years distance. Well, Mac thought, that's certainly good news. Let's hope it still works when we get on the ground. Well, Drell said over the bridge channel, "Captain, we have company." Mac glanced down at his display showing medium contact and immediately saw a ship icon display slightly offset to a direct course here. It was apparent that the other ship didn't want to shower us with engine exhaust as he approached and decelerated. As the ship came near, its trajectory began to assume a French curve. Course to approach without having its exhaust impinge on us. It finally came within 20 feet, directly in front of us. Oh, Briley's voice addressed us and said, "If you'll look out your bow windows, you'll see a hand-drawn sign. Mac, Drell, and Seuss, who was still in a temporary bridge seat behind her twin pilot, could see the sign. It said, "Follow me, we're having filet mignon for dinner." Well, the escort moved to the side a few yards and turned to direct its exhaust alongside us, but not touching us. We could see the engines were almost exactly like ours, water and sun port. His exhaust glowed as with a bright light centered in the exhaust. I gave Drell the command to follow them at a 200-yard separation. She did that, being careful to stay well clear of the other ship as they lost altitude. O'Reilly came on the air and said that we will be at Bandrock City in about 20 minutes, and we will stay at this altitude until we get clearance to approach the spaceport. Please continue to follow me. Mac replied he would comply. Mac thought that they must have been halfway around the planet from Bandrock City when they arrived in orbit. Later he found out that he was generally correct. He thought he was surprised to find that he apparently had some unknown talent for knowing where he was space-wise and could estimate a good trajectory from the most meager airborne clues. When about 15 minutes of steady progress over the clouds, the pair of ships began to lose altitude. They broke clear of the clouds and could see an expanse of concrete off in the distance, with black spots in neat rows on the surface. Briley came on the frequency and asked if they could see the bright, flashing blue lights ahead. Mac replied that yes, he could see them. Briley then said that they should go to those lights and land their ship as directed by the light truck on the square with the red light in the center. "Do you see that?" he said. Mac looked at Drell and saw a nod as she calmly flew the ship straight for the red light in the square. Drell said that she had done this before and for him not to worry. Well, she landed the ship precisely on the square, pointed at the truck with the blue light. We could all see the lead ship land 2 squares away. They could also see a small crowd in bleachers set up between our 2 ships. The bleachers were pointed toward us. Well, Mac keyed the PA and said, "Well, we're here. Meet me at the aft gangway, and it looks like we may have met our host." The crew met at the aft gangway. Mac keyed the code to open the ramp. Drell made sure she remained at his side at all times. She told him on the bridge that she was going to lead him by the hand to make sure he didn't screw it all up. Now, where did I hear that before? Mac led them down the gangway, and they moved in a line toward the bleacher structure. Well, a small golf cart-looking vehicle left the other ship and came toward us at breathtaking speeds. The driver screeched to a stop, and the passenger got off. He ran toward us and stopped a few feet away. He was looking at Drell. He couldn't take his eyes off her. He finally turned to me and introduced himself as Briley. He turned to Drell and greeted her by her long-form name, Jondrella. At this time, we were maybe 20 yards from the bleachers, so Briley led us toward it and told us all that He wanted us to stop near and in a line abreast so the photographers could take some pictures. As he said this, Drell broke ranks, ran toward the bleachers, where a couple scrambled down and onto the ground, where by this time Drell was upon them. They ran together and seemed to not be able to get enough of each other's hugs and obvious displays of affection. Drell finally drew back and, taking them each by a hand, led them over to me. They stopped in front of me, where Drell simply said, "Mac, this is my mother and father." She turned to them and said to them, "Mom, Dad, this is my dad, and here is my mom," as she pointed to Mitsuko standing beside Mac. The rest of the crew standing there then broke ranks and crowded around us five, and it got pretty hands-on for a few minutes as hugs and kisses were handed out freely to Drell's new 4-person family. Well, Drell looked around and spotted Seuss and Mary and beckoned them both to come. They stepped up, and Drell told her mother and father that these are my 2 sisters. Drell continued saying that this one is Seuss, and she is my fellow ship's pilot, and we both fly that ship over there. Her father and mother had to stand there and stare at their daughter as she said this. Her mother said, "You did what?" About this time, Briley said it was time for us all to get seated on the bleachers, as the Admiral wanted to say a few words. My crew then gathered themselves and moved to a vacant section in the bleachers. A fellow in resplendent uniform was standing on a podium in front of the bleachers. He introduced himself as simply Jean Drell's uncle. He said he was going to be brief. He said he welcomed the crew and captain of SS Prime 2. He said they had been waiting for some time for us to show up, as Prime couldn't tell us exactly when they would arrive. They knew Jandrella would be with us and hoped she wouldn't get us all killed getting here. Well, the crowd erupted in laughter as Drell blushed a deep pink. He then said his name was James. He said he had a last name, but it's so long that James will do nicely. He finished by saying that we were all to board these shuttle buses over there, and he was going to take us all out for dinner. He said that he would bring us all back here to the ship for the night, and then tomorrow, if you wish, you could choose to stay in local hotels for the duration. Well, he finished by saying that he was really glad for them to be here on Sarnox. He said it was a thrill for him, actually. He got down from his podium and motioned for all of us to follow him. Well, Briley followed them all, as it seemed he was part of the welcoming committee. Well, it turns out he was James' son. Seemed to know everyone. He was Jandrella's cousin. All one big happy family. Well, James sat with Mac on the bus. He couldn't seem to contain himself. He finally blurted out that Prime is my brother. Jandrella is his niece, who was transported clandestinely to Prime as a prod to get Prime to get busy and find a way to travel extrasolar. James told Mac in a rush that Sarnox was initially populated from Prime by a bunch of dissident scientists who had accidentally found the translator solution, as your man Shin has done. Well, James said that they had then made it a sort of game to tell Prime from time to time that the only way for the two planets to finally reconcile would be for Prime to find out how they initially got to Sarnox in the first place. Now, James said, you guys have done it, and I'm going to go myself to tell him that he is welcome on Sarnox at any time. Well, James concluded that the benefits will be enormous for the two planets to establish commerce with each other after all this time. Well, I could only sit there with my mouth open. Well, the shuttles drove into what actually seemed to be some sort of governmental center and then stopped in front of a majestic-looking building. We were ushered into a ballroom where it appeared we were going to be treated to what appeared to be at first glance a state dinner. There were maybe another 50 people in a group waiting for the shuttles, and they all followed us into the hall. We were led to what appeared to be a bit larger couple of tables with somewhat more relaxed seating for us all. Maybe 5 of us to a table and the other 5 at the table, strangers to us, but rapidly got the conversation started. And soon the room was alive with laughter and casual conversation. Well, I found myself seated beside James, who was a jovial sort, who soon had the group at our table relaxed and talking, set to enjoy the evening. Well, Sharon, Pinky, Mitsuko, Drill, and Seuss were at my table with James and his wife with another couple. Well, I noticed a sort of commotion at the entrance to the room, and the room quieted and became still. A person in a sort of military uniform came into the room unaccompanied. His uniform was unadorned except for a single bright jeweled star on his left chest. As he passed each table, the occupants all stood while he paused to shake hands, and in the quiet could be heard to call each person by name. He worked his way into the hall toward the front where we were seated. Oh, slowly he advanced through the crowd, greeting people and shaking hands. The crowd remained quiet as he moved. Well, he got to the other crew table, and as he approached, they all stood as the rest of the tables had done. He greeted each person by name, including all of our remaining crew. Well, he came to our table as we all stood. He moved to Sharon and said, "Sweetheart," as he took her into his arms where he held her for some moments. She had her arms around him, holding tight. Well, they finally moved apart where he kissed her on the cheek. He moved to Pinky and said, "Sugar." He grabbed her and held her close as I could almost see her starting to cry. Well, Sharon brought out a tissue and dabbed at her eyes and handed one to Pinky. Pinky had her face buried into the figure's chest and neck and held on for dear life. They finally broke apart as he kissed her on the cheek. Well, he moved around the table and at the end, before me, said, "Drill, how good it is to meet you and greet you as you come home from your adventures. And as a pilot, too." They kissed each other on the lips as it was obvious he was very pleased to see her. Well, James had moved beside me as this person moved in front of me. James said, "Mac, allow me to introduce you to the President." "Mr. President, this is Mac Rand, who you may know from somewhere or other." Well, I laughed as I said, "Hi, Dad. Fancy meeting you here." He laughed uproariously at my uncommonly droll, uncommon presidential greeting. We hugged and held on to each other for dear life. Well, I suppose he was thinking that his son was welcome, whatever the place or time. See you next time.